Yeah, thanks everyone. Really happy to be here. Appreciate the time, all of you in the Atlantic Data team. I'm going to be pretty quick because I'm not only a speaker, I'm also a participant in the beer tasting. So that sounds like a lot of fun. But happy to tell you a little bit about Proofpoint Insider Threat and Observe It. So again, my name is Josh Epstein. I run marketing for the Insider Threat business unit at Proofpoint. I joined through the acquisition of Observe It, which happened just late in 2019. So we've been part of Proofpoint almost 12 months. Really makes a lot of sense to combine them if hopefully you're all familiar with the broader Proofpoint portfolio, but Insider Threat Management fits really well with Proofpoint's broader people-centric security strategy. So lots of good synergy there. So wanted to talk just briefly by starting out by talking about our perspective on this sort of new perimeter, this sort of people perimeter. And I think everyone's probably seen variations of this theme. Really this idea of the zero trust world, really the fact that people are now truly the new perimeter, particularly now that we're all working from home. We've got employees connecting to every piece of corporate data, corporate infrastructure from a variety of endpoints. They're connecting directly to SaaS applications. They're from the same endpoint. They're sharing data from their own personal social media, messaging, and cloud sharing services. So it really does redefine kind of this notion of the security perimeter. And a couple things we'd like to point out as we sort of build up this idea of who are insider threats. First off, it's not just employees. It's really anyone that has either authorized access or some sort of established business relationship, with the organization. So whether it's a contractor, partner, supplier, supply chain partner, customer, people that share infrastructure, but even people that have routine communication with those in the organization and might set up different alternate ways to transfer information. So people truly are this security perimeter. And that sets up this really complicated information edge. So if you think about one of the primary goals of insider threat management is to really stop this data loss. And it becomes incredibly complex as you visualize this very ragged information edge that really this information can live really anywhere on endpoints, on SaaS applications, on servers, in personal Dropboxes, et cetera. So the challenge here is really to think differently about insider threats and really recognize that they are a very unique threat vector and a highly complex threat vector that requires sort of a focused effort. Yes, cybersecurity tools do have addressed insider threats for a long time, but to think very specifically about strategies and tools that can specifically target this vector. So just some stats, Verizon reports that 30% of all security breaches involve some sort of internal threat actor. We've done our own research for the Ponemon Group on the cost of insider threats. They estimate that $11 million per year on average is spent by organizations on managing insider threats. This obviously varies significantly from company to company, but it just gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge. Complex to resolve. One of the reasons they're so expensive is that it takes so long to resolve. So on average, 77 days to contain and close an insider incident. And these happen very frequently. So you're talking about, 60% of organizations experiencing more than 2 incidents per month. So, teams are stressed to both analyze all these alerts, decide which alerts represent potential threats, and then really go through and investigate and contain multiple threats per year. So very complex, very unique from other types of classic security challenges. So the other point we'd like to make is that this is not just about malicious users. So yes, the classic malicious user, the salesperson that walked out the door, quit the job and took a USB stick full of customer files, that happens. Our research shows that really only about 14% of insider threats do fit in that classic malicious user. Compromised users are also a category of insider threats. So individuals that are really acting under the influence unknowingly from an outside actor, whether it's clicking on a phishing link or being socially engineered, they really participate in this breach, whether by compromising their account credentials or actually exfiltrating data, sending something to an outside actor without knowing. And then as the last category is negligence. So people that are looking to do the right thing, perhaps using tools, unsanctioned tools in a way just to try to get their job done, whether it's a USB stick or a personal Dropbox. This actually results in the majority of these insider incidents. So important to think about the full spectrum as we're planning approaches and techniques to contain. So what I'd like to do is really talk through some examples of actual threats that you may or may not have heard about. So just pick a few of these. We actually have a ebook on our site that talks through the top 10 of the last 24 months. And so it's some interesting reading here. We'll just talk through a couple of our favorites that illustrate some of the key issues. This first one, I know there's a lot of New England folks here. I should have started by saying that I'm actually based in Sudbury, Massachusetts, so right outside of New England. Observit was a Boston headquartered company. Most of us still live in the Boston area. Cybereason is another Boston-based security company. A pretty high-profile situation last year where one of the product managers left to go to a competitor and walked out the door with a whole bunch of product plans on a USB stick. So this is a classic intellectual property theft, malicious employee. One of the key takeaways here is that certainly prevention is important. So if we could have found ways to sort of block that exfiltration or watch that individual once they gave their notice was important. But what was crazy here is that this case went all the way to court. That's a really long time and a really expensive process. Really very difficult with no tools in place to go back and kind of create the record. If you're just sifting through log files, it's very difficult to see this kind of stuff and build up enough of an evidence trail to support a litigation. With tools like Observit or other similar platforms, you get a lot more visibility. You get the ability to really extract a very clear timeline of activity that can be used certainly for litigation, but more often than not, it's used just to confront the employee and say, listen, like here's the screenshots, here's all the stuff that you did, like give it back, and you can really resolve situations much faster. Second example, Twitter. I'm sure everyone here has heard about this little Twitter attack that happened just a few months ago where a bunch of celebrity accounts were compromised and scammed some end users out of Bitcoin actually to donate. Interesting thing here. First off, only over $100,000 was stolen. Most of it was recovered. Not a big dollar value, but massive kind of brand damage to Twitter here. So important to understand that insider threats and these breaches in general can be really high profile, can really cause a lot of emotional distress and kind of brand equity damage. This was clearly the actual bad actor here was an outsider, a very clever 17-year-old that used a bunch of social engineering and a bunch of bogus Slack messages to pose as another employee and get credentials from another IT admin here. So good example of how a compromised actor can take advantage of insiders and how these insiders can unknowingly participate. I'll give Twitter credit here. They definitely responded very quickly. They were very upfront in their response. They took ownership, so they handled it well. But it's a really good example to see kind of how insiders can become compromised and really start, be part of this broader brand damage. Last example, it's actually a French media company, but really important here. So they lost over 7 billion records of customer data. Important example here because actually there's an accidental case of negligence on the part of their supplier, on the part of their cloud hosting service. So we see everywhere this sort of value chains disaggregating and the use of contractors or service providers. Really common, and very common now is actually outsourcing sort of parts of IT or parts of cloud hosting. So really understanding kind of the potential for leaks to occur or breaches to occur that originate from a supplier can still reflect very poorly on the company itself. So really thinking holistically about kind of managing the full chain of value of having instrumentation in place and tools and techniques in place to really look at the entire value chain here. So another good example. You know, this talk wouldn't be honest if we didn't talk about the realities of really kind of where we are today. Me working from my home office here, I assume most everyone else working from their home offices. We really do live in this new work reality. Joseph Blankenship from Forrester, we do a lot of work with, talked about this pandemic creating this perfect conditions for insider threat. I wanted to share some of the actual things that we've seen kind of evolve here over the last 7 months or so from the insider threat perspective. You know, first off, a lot of our customers are struggling with just a massive increase in the number of endpoints. You know, a lot of organizations are spinning up new laptops, right, to send home with people that were classically doing most of their jobs behind the firewall. We hear a lot of this in banks and you know, other you know, investment firms, but all over, where you have certain individuals that were really performing, say, wire transfer activities or sort of IT operations, privileged access users that typically did most of their privileged work behind a firewall are now all being set up to do it remotely. So maintaining visibility of what's happening on these new endpoints is critical. Similarly, we have a lot of companies really extending the number of virtualized applications. So, you know, there's still a lot of kind of on-prem hosted applications that are now being extended out to remote workers through you know, app virtualization tools. And so maintaining visibility on the servers themselves as to what the users are doing remotely and ensuring they're not exfiltrating data, bringing it from the server out to their endpoint, and then potentially exfiltrating it becomes even more important. I know I'm guilty. I'm sure most people on the call here are guilty of using a personal productivity tool just to get your job done faster. As a marketer, I trade lots of big files, and sometimes the file transfer rate for Proofpoint's email or even our OneDrive doesn't work out well. So maybe I use my personal Dropbox to move a file around. Most of the time, this is no big deal. If you're trading really sensitive information, this does create a very big exposure point. So certainly balancing productivity with risky shadow IT is of more concern, really sensing. We have security teams asking us for solutions to sort of find those instances more proactively. We talked about privileged access users, really, you know, sending a whole bunch of privileged access users home with remote endpoints to do their job. These last two, probably the most important. You know, we're now in a situation where we're both onboarding, kind of hiring new employees and standing them up 100% remote. And so keeping coverage, understanding what they're doing as they're coming up to speed on what are sanctioned file sharing services, what are not, becomes very important in maintaining that visibility. And then certainly as we're offboarding employees, whether they're leaving voluntarily or they're terminated, you know, in that critical time phase where they still have access, just managing what data is moving through their endpoint or potentially off of their endpoint can be really important in certain regulated industries. So wanted to share just kind of 4 brief steps, just sort of the way Observant and Proofpoint think about this approach to reducing insider risk, and glad to continue this conversation afterwards. But just to give a sense for how we think about it, it's step 1, understanding kind of who's at risk and what's at risk. Step 2, coming up with a basic paradigm for how do you think about detecting and responding to insider threats. Step 3 is running that incident response efficiently as quickly as possible. And then 4, how do you think about an insider threat management program and how do you build technology into that program? So first off, the people and what's at risk. So we've mentioned most of these individuals, but you know, most of our customers first think about like who are they specifically worried about? Are they worried about departing employees? Are they worried about privileged access users? Are they worried about third-party contractors? It sort of starts with a subgroup of the population, and then it might actually expand over time. The what are they protecting is equally important, and this can depend a lot on the industry or the type of company, but you know, it could be intellectual property, like we saw in the cyber recent case. It could be regulated data, like in the French newspaper that lost their personally identifiable information of their customer base. You know, it could be fraud, financial fraud, like in the Twitter case. You know, it could be just leveraging access to cause damage or disruption to services. So really understanding kind of what is the biggest concern and kind of who are the biggest concern is where we start out with our customers. In terms of detecting and responding to insider threats, I mean, this is really kind of what Observe It does. And so that's a much longer discussion and a demo is sort of seeing the platform. But at a very high level, how we've attacked this problem is to recognize that number one, people are complex. We do crazy things. To understand people, it means understanding our intent, and to understand intent requires visibility and context of our actions. So the way our platform works is it really looks at these sort of three categories of information to kind of create this wraparound context to really describe what an individual is doing. And we do it in a very kind of elegant way to provide, great data visualization, lots of different data points to a SOC analyst. We look at content, so the information that individuals are interacting with and kind of where they're moving it, what they're doing with it. Behavior, kind of all of the activity associated with it. So, what websites are they visiting? What emails are they sending? And kind of tracking all this log information that's available anyway, but it's just sort of aggregated in a very usable way. Then combining that information with known threat intelligence. It could be threat on the individual. Like we know this person is on an HR watch list for some reason. It could be threat intelligence related to the website that they're visiting. It could be related to the extension of the attachment that they clicked on the web, on the email. So it's really combining this information in a way that allows you to see it very clearly and make some decisions. Make primarily a decision of, is this an incident that we need to follow up on or not? So the third step is really looking at optimizing that incident response process. And the real challenge here is that insider threat management is a team sport. It's not just a cybersecurity challenge. It involves HR, legal and privacy, compliance, the line of business managers, and really the ability to share lots of information very efficiently within the platform is really what we focus on. So as a SOC analyst might have a first level alert, they spot an activity or an individual that is legitimately doing something concerning. Maybe they escalate it to a second level analyst to confirm. Then they maybe bring in HR or the line of business manager, and the ability to share information in a very understandable way. So you're not asking an HR person to analyze a log file. You're actually showing them a very clear step-by-step set of actions that helps them understand what's going on is very important. And then obviously, we'd spoken to the importance of preserving evidence and creating an auditable trail to support a confrontation or a litigation if it goes that far. It becomes very important. And then obviously being able to connect into other broader ecosystem tools, SIMs and SOARs is a very commonplace application. Finally, really thinking holistically about a technology-enabled insider threat program. Insider threat programs are much more than just a tool set. It is a people process technology approach. It involves things like doing background checks on employees, making sure your awareness and training programs are in place and are kind of covering the types of concerns of both detecting insider threats, but also not becoming one of those compromised insiders. Thinking about all of the data that you would need to collect and thinking very responsibly about what data you're collecting, where you're managing it, how you're managing it, thinking about the privacy concerns, and what level of monitoring makes sense, who you're monitoring, when you're monitoring, does that align with your both your local privacy rules and regulations, as well as just your corporate culture, the way that you want to think about it. Having a team in place that can really drive these investigations, and then really supporting it with a process that is continually innovating, continually optimizing around new legal considerations, new policies and procedures in place, and then really thinking about how a technology platform like Proofpoint's Observe It platform can really help drive this forward. So with that, I'll pause. Would be glad to take some questions, and certainly understand if folks want to just jump right into the beer. But let me pause and see if I can just open up the floor for questions, or feel free to use the chat tool as well.